We'll begin today's story with a woman named Candice Foster from a town named Kipling located in Saskatchewan, Canada. People from her town called her to be a troubled young woman. Why? Well, she was a single mother working at a gas station, and she had a reputation for being a short-tempered party girl. And women with such reputation usually don't sit right with our society, especially when it involves going against such a man that we will discuss soon. On the night of October 31st, 1992, she got in a heated argument with her boyfriend at the time, leaving her furious and agitated. At that point, she wasn't feeling too well, so she decided to go to the hospital. She visited her local hospital where Dr. John Schneeberger was on duty for the night. There was another doctor on site, however, he was on duty in the delivery room for the entire night, so the nurses naturally recommended that she see John, who also had delivered Candice's baby a little while back. When John initially saw her, she was in a very bad state. She was sobbing and she told John that she was really pissed off at her boyfriend and that she wanted to kill him. Comforting her, John offered to give her a sedative which would help her relax, and Candice agreed to take the sedative. But to her surprise, it was an injection and not a pill. She wasn't a doctor, so she didn't question it much. Candice was kept in the hospital for overnight monitoring and was discharged the next morning. Now, John and his wife, Lisa, were newlyweds, and they also lived in Kipling. John was one of the only two doctors in the town, making him popular and very well liked amongst the people of Kipling, unlike Candice. John was known to be a person who loved giving back to the community in one way or another. For example, he was helping build a local pool for the community. He was also known to be a great father to Lisa's children from her previous marriage. Whenever Lisa would go to town, people would sing praises for her husband and her family. So it came as a huge shock when a detective knocked on John and Lisa's door on November 1st, 1992. The detective told John that there was a complaint filed against him by a young woman who was accusing him of sexual assault. The young woman was none other than Candice Foster. She stated that John had sexually assaulted her in the hospital where he had treated her the night before. She said that John injected her with a sedative to calm her down, but when she became drowsy, he raped her. Because of the injection, she was unable to move, but she was aware of her surroundings. John immediately denied the accusations, and he told the detective that he had given Candice Versed just to calm her down. For those of you who don't know, Versed is a sedative that's often used before a surgery or a procedure. It can often knock a person out, causing drowsiness and also reducing anxiety. Depending on the person taking it, it can last anywhere from 1 to 6 hours. John said that it is likely that Versed may have caused Candice to have hallucinations, and that she was probably just imagining the whole situation. Traces of Versed were in fact found in Candice's system, making John's claims more believable. But at the end of the day, what John was saying was just a theory. However, there was one more way to find out whether John had in fact sexually assaulted Candice. When Candice reported this crime, she brought her underwear that she was wearing at the time of the crime, which had a semen stain. So, a DNA test could tell the authorities whether the DNA found on the underwear was that of John's. The detectives asked if John would be willing to provide his blood for a DNA test. John had been claiming that he's innocent, so without much hesitation, he agreed to provide a blood test. John books an appointment and provides the required blood to the authorities that gets sent to a lab for testing. While waiting, Candice was sure. She had zero doubt that this DNA test would prove everything that she had been saying. However, majority of the town believed that she was just doing this to seek attention and that she was in love with John. People believed that John could never do such a thing. After all, he was this amazing doctor that always went out of his way to help people. But Candice stood firm. So, needless to say, she was stunned and outraged when John's DNA test was found to be not a match to the semen found on her underwear. Candice was really pissed off, and she did not believe the results, so she told the authorities that she wanted a retest. She said that because he's a doctor, he must have somehow manipulated the process. The detectives told her that that was just not possible, since the procedure is always fully monitored. Either way, Candice convinced the authorities to test John again. So, a lab technician withdrew the blood again, and John was free to go. Because DNA sampling was still new, it took a while before the test came back. Regardless, once again, the test came back with the same results. John was not a match, and thereafter he was ruled out as a suspect. At this point, Candice somewhat accepted her fate and moved away to Regina, as disappointed as she was. Lisa, John, and the people of Kipling were relieved that everyone can now move on and live normally. In 1994, the case was officially closed. Lisa and John went on to have 2 more children in 1995 and 1996. Life was going really well for the family. Candice, on the other hand, was just not ready to give up yet. So she hired a very experienced private investigator named Larry O'Brien. Larry would turn out to be really crucial for this case. He had worked for RCMP for about 25 years before becoming a PI. Larry listened to Candice's story very carefully, and because of how adamant Candice was, he believed her. He decided to take her file and help her figure out the entire situation. In 1996, Larry sent his assistant to John's office. He goes there undercover and asks if John wanted to enter a contest to win a diamond ring. John agreed. He filled out the form, licked the adhesive on the envelope, sealed it, and gave it back to the man. The envelope, however, became contaminated and the DNA could not be used. So Larry decides to take the matters into his own hands, and he goes into the parking lot where John often parked his car during working hours. Larry easily found the car, and to his luck, the car was left unlocked. After a quick check, Larry found a hair on the seat and decided to take it in for analysis. Unfortunately, the hair didn't have a root, so it could not be used once again. Larry then decided to take one more trip and see if he can find something else. And luckily, he found a recently used chapstick. Larry takes the chapstick, rubs it on a plastic piece of paper, hoping this would suffice as enough to conduct a DNA test this time. And it turns out that enough skin cells had in fact transferred and a DNA test could be conducted. And what do you know? The DNA found on the chapstick was a match to the man who had raped Candice Foster. Obviously, this is the moment Candice had been waiting for so long, so this information was immediately taken to the authorities. And sadly, the authorities said they can't use this information because the evidence was obtained illegally. But they assured her that they would ask John to give another blood test. However, this time the whole process would be videotaped. When this information was given to John, he said the chapstick was not his, but he decided to do a blood test for one last time. Yet again, on November 20, 1996, John turned up for his appointment. It's important to note here that the blood tests were usually taken from people's fingers. However, in John's case, he said his fingers were really sensitive and they bruised really easily, and he could instead give blood via his arm. Now, of course, a doctor needs his working fingers, so the technician agreed. The vein on his arm was very prominent, but still the technician was having a difficult time withdrawing the blood. She was confused, but she finally got the blood. However, she was left questioning the strange color of the blood. For some reason, the blood did not look fresh. Regardless, she submitted the blood for a test, and as it turns out, the blood was too degraded to detect DNA. At this point, the detectives were obviously disappointed. However, they were starting to sense that something was just not right about the whole situation. And they would remain doubtful until they received a harrowing call from Lisa a couple of months later. On April 25th, 1997, Lisa was home with her 15-year-old daughter, Amy. Amy was her eldest daughter from Lisa's first marriage. Amy hesitantly asked Lisa if she could maybe join her biological father for the weekend. Now, Lisa was startled by these questions just because the family had already made plans for the weekend, and this question was a bit odd. When Lisa asked Amy if she was okay, Amy decided to take her mom to her room. And Lisa, confusingly, but also knowing that something was just not right, followed Amy to the room. And when they got to the room, Amy pulls the covers from her bed, uncovering a used condom. Amy tells her mom, "This is not the first time he did this to me." Lisa felt as if the ground under her feet was breaking because she knew right away that Amy was talking about her husband, John. Amy further confided in her mother by telling her that John had been sexually assaulting her since she was 13 years old. She recalled him giving her an injection and raping her on his medical bed in his office. Sometimes he gave her an injection to help her sleep, but the next day she would wake up feeling groggy and that something had happened. So when she found a condom wrapper, she knew that she had evidence and that she should tell her mother right away. When Lisa asked Amy why she didn't tell her sooner, Amy responded, "You didn't believe Candice, so why would you believe me?" Lisa knew that moment that Candice had been telling the truth all along and decided to contact the authorities immediately. After confronting John, she poked around in his home office and found a full box of syringes, gloves, condoms, and Versed. Amy then decided to take all this evidence to the local police station, and John was immediately charged for Amy's sexual assault. At this point, the detectives took his saliva, blood, and hair for a DNA test again. The test came back as a perfect match. However, even though the DNA was a complete match, John was completely denying raping Candice and Amy. He said he was being set up by Candice. He went on to say that Candice was in love with him and she wanted to ruin his marriage, and that she had taken a used condom and put the contents of that condom on her underwear. So he knew that the semen was his and the DNA would come back as a match and he would be charged due to the crooked system. So he took the matters into his own hands and came up with a plan. 2 weeks after being accused, a young male patient was in his office, and John intentionally took more blood than he needed and stored it in his medical fridge. Just before his blood test appointments for the DNA testing, he would slice his upper arm and insert a 15-centimeter long tube with someone else's blood into the cut and forced it in his arm. Every time he did that, it looked like a prominent vein, and he insisted the blood be taken from his arm instead of his fingers. And because the authorities were relying on his cooperation, they had no choice. He went on to do this 3 times. However, by the time of his last test, the blood had already gone bad, so it could not detect any DNA. John was then charged with Candice's sexual assault as well. His medical license was immediately suspended, and on November 25th, 1999, John was found guilty of sexually assaulting Candice and Amy, drugging Candice, and obstruction of justice. He was, however, acquitted of aggravated sexual assault against Amy and drugging her. He was given just 6 years in prison, and in 2003, after serving only 4 years, he was released on parole. The sentence was ridiculously short, but according to an HBO special, a lot of people still believed that he was innocent, and they were willing to become his patients again, so I can only wonder if that played a part in his sentence. He then moved to Regina, same city where Candice had moved to. However, that didn't last for too long. In 2003, a petition was filed to revoke his Canadian citizenship. He became a citizen in 1993, and this is when he was accused for Candice's sexual assault. Had he not lied during his blood test, he would have been charged much earlier, and the immigration committee would have declined his citizenship application on that basis. And the immigration committee agreed, so they revoked his citizenship, and in 2004, he returned to South Africa, where he was originally from. Many people still believe that he was innocent, and he was framed by Candice and RCMP. As for Candice, she filed a civil suit against the hospital as well as John. I'm not too sure what the status of that civil lawsuit is right now, but she did get married and she works as a continuing care assistant for an addiction services facility. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. What do you think? Was the sentence okay? Do you think he was actually framed by Candice and RCMP? Or do you think he should have received a life sentence, as many others do?